urgent note that was handed to me. Special parking rate. Guest campaign lobby. Thank you. I was talking to Rick Muth earlier, who's one of our honorees. Super guy. By the way, he likes Trojan football, which even makes it. And he thinks I'm a good announcer too. So, and we were talking about what we're here about and what we're doing, and we're raising money for education. And I was remembering when I was a high school student at Bishop Aumont High School. Thank you. We got some lanterns. We'll hear from a lantern a little later. You know, and it's expensive. It costs money for private education, right? My parents literally had to take a second job to allow me to go to Bishop Aumont. And they were willing to make that sacrifice. Obviously, I'm indebted to them you know, forever. My father's no longer alive, but my mother is, and it was an immense sacrifice. So, I mean, that's really what we're here about today, is to allow children to get the quality education, the quality Catholic education that we're all about, and Orange County is all about, with all the amazing elementary and Catholic high schools. So please take a look at the pledge card. I made an announcement earlier. I didn't know if everyone heard through breakfast, but please take a look at the pledge cards and do your best to help out. Okay. Are you ready to have some fun? So it's my privilege to introduce our next special guest, Richard J. Riordan. Everyone knows that name. Currently serves as the chairman of the Alliance for College-Ready Public Schools. It's a successful charter management organization that operates 13 middle and high schools in Los Angeles. He previously served as Secretary for Education under Governor Schwarzenegger. In 1981, Riordan created the Riordan Foundation with one goal in mind: to teach children how to read and write. A very worthwhile goal. Through its signature RX for Reading program, the foundation has distributed 25,520 computers to 2,140 schools in 40 states, and enabled the purchase of over 172,000 books for elementary classroom libraries. In addition to Riordan's education work for young students, he co-founded the Riordan programs at the Anderson School for UCLA, hence the rivalry. Mr. Riordan served as mayor of Los Angeles from 1993 to 2001. As mayor, Mr. Riordan was focused on improving public safety, creating quality jobs, rebuilding the city's neighborhoods, and bringing overdue reform to the city's public school system. Riordan was also a founding member of the nationally acclaimed Learn School Reform Effort and a founding board member of LA's Best, an innovative and nationally recognized after-school program serving thousands of children in Los Angeles' disadvantaged neighborhoods. Riordan is a Knight of Malta and longtime supporter of Catholic education. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no brighter life for education in this area. Please welcome Mayor Richard Riordan.
See why I support UCLA. Right. And this guy that's going to speak to you later, I'm surprised he's going to even show up here after UCLA beat them this year. But I'm supposed to be up here for about a half hour, which I expect most of you to be asleep by then. I think I'm going to break some of the rules and say if the 20 tables closest to me could ask questions after, because if you're from the back, we have nothing to record what you're saying. But you could ask questions anytime. I I'm speaking. If you disagree with me, you get up and give a speech against what I said, for example. I like to start my speeches a lot of time to break the ice by sharing with the audience an embarrassing moment I had as mayor. And I had many of them. But one I'll share with you is I went to the Jewish Home for the Aged in Van Nuys to wait on table. And what we were trying to do is show the public how humble I was. So we had TV cameras there, newsprint, and everything there. And as I walked in, I looked across the room and I saw this beautiful woman in her 90s, and I knew I had known her very well. So I walked across the room and I said, I can't think of your name. What's the context where I met you? I can't remember. And she said, I've never met you before in my life. I said, well, you know who I am. At this point, she gently got a hold of my wrist. She said, no, but let me take you to the front desk and we'll ask them who you are. I didn't think it was funny. Maybe I'll give you briefly my biography. I grew up in the Bronx. I learned the Fordham fight song, the Columbia fight song, and every other school there. We eventually moved to New Rochelle, about 10 miles away. And there I went to Holy Family, which was run by the Sisters of Little or No Mercy. I had 55 kids in my class, and none of us dared whisper because the nun would take a chalk and she could hit you from 30 feet away, right in the middle of the forehead with the chalk. I remember Sister Carmelita, she broke one kid, Bobby McCoskey's, knuckle with a ruler, and then flunked him in penmanship. And I hear she's in heaven today. I don't know why, but so much for the fun. I grew up, I went through Holy Family with 55 kids. We were a big cross-section of humanity. In those days, there were very few rich people. It was during the Depression. And, but we had a good mixture of middle-class, poor kids, and we got along very well, and nobody made a difference with the other based on how well off their families were. Then, from there, I went to a Jesuit high school called Cranwell, and I ended up second in my class. There were only 28 in the class. And the fellow who beat me as number one has gone on to be the top lawyer for Warren Buffett and a bunch of other big shots. And he always came in number one, and I always came in number two. I hate him for that. But from there, I went to Santa Clara here in California. I had a football scholarship, which I lost very quickly because I realized I wasn't any good at it. But I love Santa Clara. And when I was there, we beat UCLA, we beat Stanford, we beat Oklahoma, a lot of top schools in football. And we won the Orange Bowl against Kentucky one year. I remember Vern Sterling, who was one of our guards, was first string All-American, and he only weighed 181 pounds. Now the typical guard weighs, what, about 300 pounds? I can imagine what it would be like fighting against them. From Santa Clara, my father got sick, and so I wanted to move back east, and they accepted me at Princeton. So I went to Princeton, and this changed my life because through very special help in getting into Princeton was a philosopher named Jacques Maritain. who was a famous Catholic philosopher, and he took 6 of us. For 2 years, he had only 6 students, and I was fortunate to be one of those. Riordan was considered probably the finest Thomistic philosopher in the last 100 years, and he was the first layman to be offered to be a cardinal as a layman, because technically the cardinals do not have to be priests. And he was offered that, but he turned it down. But he was a wonderful man that taught that your beliefs you have to turn into social work to help other human beings. Somewhere in here, I started to read a guy named G.K. Chesterton, who is not only a very funny writer, but a very serious writer. And he said that all theology can be described in 2 sentences. The first sentence, in the eyes of God, I am extremely important. The second sentence, in the eyes of God, everybody else is just as important as I am. And I've held that all my life. I teach at the UCLA Business School now, the Anderson School. And I teach 4 levels. There are 4 axioms of being a leader. Having the courage to make decisions, the courage to fire people, etc., etc. Secondly, and probably the most important in some ways, is caring and giving. 2 sides of the same thing. And what Riordan taught me was you cared about everybody. And I think that if I'm successful in life, that one thing alone has made me successful, particularly as a politician, because I will stop and talk to a janitor just as long as I will stop and talk to the president of a major company. Because each of them are important in the eyes of God. And interestingly enough, as a businessman, each of them can teach you something. The other in the 4 things is empowering others. Politicians do not know how to empower other people. They think they're so important they can do everything themselves. But I learned if you hire the best and the brightest people you can and empower them, you can get anything done. And my success as mayor was that. I did very few things myself, but I knew how to hire the best people and to empower them. And since I was a politician, how to take credit for everything they did. But, and the last thing is relentless pursuit of goals. Being a closer, making things happen. A 5th one, which I'm debating right now, is having a sense of humor. I think sense of humor is synonymous with somebody who has a high intellect. Somebody that can see the weird differences, the twists in life, particularly about themselves. And I remember playing golf with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we never play anymore. I'm going to ask you all a question. Would you play golf with somebody who cheats on the score on almost every other hole? Would you? Anybody here play with him? Would you play with somebody that hits it in the woods and it mysteriously ends up in the middle of the fairway? Well, neither will Arnold. But we still talk sometimes. I love Santa Clara. It really taught me to love the Catholic Church and to feel close to it, to think that it's involved in every part of my life, particularly caring. Right then, I mentored some inner city kids that were brought to the school, and we had a club there, and I had like 6 kids in this group, and they were trying to test me. I mean, one of them brought in pornographic pictures, when in those days there was no such thing as pornographic pictures, trying to shock me. And that kid, by the end of the semester, turned out to be a great leader and a good human being. They just needed some help. And that's what the church taught me about. After Princeton, I went into the Army. I served in Korea for a year, in a good part in the main battle lines, except I was fortunately in an area where the Chinese weren't interested in attacking us. One of the reasons was, in my area, and they reported to me, were the Ethiopians and the Turks. And they loved to collect human parts, and the Chinese did not like that. So they never attacked them. But in that, a third of my class was captured by the Chinese. They had a breakthrough in the middle of Korea, and the Korean infantry did not tell the artillery, which I was in, of the breakthrough. So all the artillery people were captured by the Chinese. Fortunately, a truce came about, and they got out within about a year. From there, the day after I got out, I started at Michigan Law School, the University of Michigan, which to me was the greatest education, intellectual education I've ever had. It's just a fantastic school. They let us graduate in 2 years. I went three 11-week summers and 4 semesters. I ended up, I'll brag about this, I ended up first in my class among all the people who were there for 2 years. And at that, I was recruited by O'Melveny and Myers, which was then the biggest law firm in California, actually, and a great firm. And I met some incredible lawyers there, all of whom were involved with charities and civic work. And they expected young lawyers to be too. And because of that, I got involved in many things like town hall, like the American Bar Association annual meeting, which is held in LA, and things, and I was able to start networking. And networking is one of the principles of being successful. If you network with the best and the brightest people, somehow or other it will rub off on you, and you will know how to get things done. I got a reputation among the waiters at the club I belonged to and everything of helping people solve problems. And the way I did was through networking. If somebody came to me with a problem, I could think of somebody other than myself who could solve that problem for them. So somebody gave me something, I never said, I can't help you. Because you can help anybody. And particularly people we know as wealthy people, as well-placed people, we know the right leaders in the network who can solve problems. The poor people don't know that. As mayor, one of the things I'm most proud of, I would go to neighborhoods throughout the city, the poor ones particularly. And I remember one neighborhood in South LA where I got there and town meeting, and all the people there got up and they were mad as hell. They asked me, when are you going to repair the sidewalks? When are you going to repair the streets? When are you going to get rid of the prostitutes who are on the street corners every night? What are you going to do about graffiti? What are you going to do about the dope house that's here? And I answered, I said, nothing. I will do absolutely nothing. All I'll do is empower you to do it. And if you're worried about what the city rules are, just ignore it. Remember, it's much easier to get forgiveness than to get permission. So just do it. Get rid of the graffiti. You don't have to call the city to get rid of it. Fix the sidewalks, cut the trees, and make sure that you make your neighborhood the best there is. And then about 6 months later, first of all, one thing I did there, I said, here's my home phone number. If you need any help, call me. None of them ever called me, but they could have. I literally gave my number. About 6 months later, I was invited back to that neighborhood. They talked about having the graffiti. They painted over every morning till the graffiti artists got tired of doing it. On the prostitutes, they had the women in the households walk rings around the prostitutes at night till they left. The same way with paving and everything else. At the end of it, I said, have you gotten rid of the dope buildings where they were selling the dope out? And one of the guys came up, stood up, and with a very simple smile, he said, their house burned down the night after you were here, mysterious. So, going back to being mayor, Tom Larkin is here. He knows how bad I was. The empowering of people is so important. I remember a month after I was elected mayor, I met with the fashion industry in Los Angeles. And from that point, every couple of weeks, I'd meet with some industry within the city. And after the meeting, a couple of the people in the fashion industry said, Mayor, we shouldn't bore you with this simple problem, but some of our best customer cars are being towed away from behind the Fashion Mart, even though there's very little traffic on the road there. So when I went out of the room, I ran into a fellow named Bill Violani, who was on my staff, and I said, Bill, do me a favor, take care of this problem, find me a simple solution. So about 2 weeks later, he came to me with a 50-page report from the transportation department of the city that showed how we could get rid of those signs in anywhere from 5 to 8 years. And I said, well, people, they elected me as a business mayor, not to wait forever to get things done. I said, go back and get me a simple plan, and I want it on my desk within a week. And then, quite honestly, I forgot about it. And about a month later, I ran into Bill, and I said, oh, Bill, I remember the tollway signs, but I think my desk, I know, is cluttered, but do you have that simple plan on my desk? He says, no, Mayor, it's taken care of. I said, is a simple plan on my desk? He says, Mayor, it's been taken care of. I said, what do you mean? He said, my son and I went out the next night, and we took the signs down. I promoted him on the spot. But, as you say, it's much easier to get forgiveness than permission. Another axiom I use is perceived power can be used as real power. People think you have the power. They just act as if you do. For example, the Northridge earthquake happened 4 months or 6 months, I forgot, right after I was elected mayor. The biggest disaster in the history of the country. At that point, the California Constitution provides that the county takes over the leadership from the city. I ignored that. People thought I had the power, so I acted like I had the power, and nobody ever questioned me. The county never questioned me. The state, the federal government never questioned me. So I remember the first morning of the earthquake, I was bumped out of bed. I my phones weren't working. We didn't have cell phones in those days. So I put on a sweatsuit, didn't shave or shower or anything, and got in my car, and I started driving down the Santa Monica freeway, and there were no lights on. And I started going about 80 or 90 miles an hour because I wanted to get downtown quickly. All of a sudden, I saw two big lights coming right at me on my side of the road. I slowed down, I swerved slightly. It was simple to I got around them, and I realized they had saved my life. I would have gone off the bridge that was down over La Cienega. And they had obviously stopped and turned around. But I got downtown about a half hour after the earthquake, and 4 stories below City Hall, we have what's called the Emergency Operations Center. And a few minutes after I got there, the head of transportation came, and we talked about a lot of the problems. And one of them was having a detour around the La Cienega Bridge that fell down or was knocked down. And they told me the only feasible detour had 3 intersections going through Culver City. And then by state law, we'd have to have somebody in the state transportation department do a study of what we want, and they have a year to report on it. And then you have to have the city councils, the mayor, the lawyers for the city have to get involved. And at this point, I remembered the tollway signs, and I said, Bob, the head of transportation, you have 5 minutes to take over those intersections. Here's my home number. You can give it to anybody that wants it. But just remember, I'll ask for forgiveness, but just take them over and do it. And of course, as you know, nobody questioned us ever on that. Because I always say, if it's ethical, and I'm supposed to talk about ethics today, if it's ethical, well, it's not true. Politicians are not all unethical. Most of them are, but essentially what I figured, if it's ethical and practical, then do it. And if people perceive you have the power, do it. And all my career, nobody once questioned me for doing that the 8 years I was mayor. I remember I'll bore you with another incident on which happened the morning after the earthquake. I met with the governor, Pete Wilson. I met with the California Transportation Department. About 30 of their members were there because by the state constitution, they were to take over rebuilding the bridges that were down. And I asked the question, I said, tell me what the architects and engineers you had out yesterday looking at the bridges, what do they say? It took them an hour to admit they had nobody out there the day before. And then they said, well, but we have plans to do that. Oh, I said, okay, would you give me the times they're going to be there in the next few days? It took them a half hour to say, well, they hadn't done that yet. So at this point, we had people from the federal government, and the governor and others in the meeting. I dragged those people out to the next office, and I swore, the only time I swore during the earthquake was at that point. And I said, we have to take over, and we can't rely on these people to get anything done. So we agreed on that. We had architects and engineers out there within an hour. We had signed contracts within 3 days. And the contracts gave bonuses for anybody that could get the bridges up within certain periods of time. And the bottom line is, within 66 days, we'd repaired all of the 5 bridges that had fallen over freeways, where it took San Francisco 15 years to do the same thing. So let me go back. My kids all went to Catholic school in Pasadena, a school called Mayfield. And it was a private Catholic school by Holy Child, yeah, the Holy Child nuns. And it was a terrific school, except they were going bankrupt. And for some strange reason, I was very young then, I was a 35, 40-year-old lawyer. They came to me to help them solve the problem. And what we decided, with the help of the nuns, and the suggestion of the nuns, is to put lay people in charge of the school. We redid the board of trustees. and had a majority, had 3 nuns and 6 lay people on that board. We did form, which was one of my brilliant ideas, was a board of regents where the nuns had control of the board of regents, but we had 2 lay and mostly nuns on it, except the only power the board of regents had was to remove all of the other trustees at once, which I figured would be politically impossible for them to do. I mean, you get rid of one person, but to get rid of the whole other board, it's just not likely unless there were major problems they've caused. So the bottom line is, almost within days, the school became solvent again, and today it's one of the most successful schools in California. And I became very friendly with the nuns, but it also led me to Immaculate Conception College, which was Sister Helen Kelly. Do you remember what the name of the school was? Immaculate Heart, okay. Immaculate Heart College, and I went on their board, and they were going bankrupt as it turned out. They were having a big fight with the then Cardinal of the Archdiocese, and bottom line is they closed the school down because they wanted to go out and help the poor and a variety of other things. Nobody thought, well, are you helping the poor if you teach and train the teachers of the future? The teachers, the leaders of the future are likely to be the more affluent areas, from affluent areas. So whether Mayfield or Immaculate Heart or others should supply society with those leaders. Became, from the law, I did mergers, acquisitions, and then public offerings. Because in the late 50s, I started in 1956, in the late 50s was the first hot issue markets, I think, in the history of the country. And I did about 4 public offerings at a time because they had no other associates really there to do the work. And I learned a lot about business, but I also learned a lot about what stocks to buy. And I did very well. My father had, when he died in 1950, left me $80,000, which was a fortune in those days. And I turned that into like $300,000 within a couple of years in the stock market. And then somebody offered me a private investment, investment in a company that made the first cheap audio tapes. And we sold that out to a major company after 2 years, and I made 7 times my money. And I was off and running. It wasn't called a venture capitalist at the time, but the equivalent of that, all of a sudden hooked up with the people in Silicon Valley who were just getting started themselves, and we did very well. In the early 80s, one of my companies went public in a very big way, and I took half the money I made in the public offering and put it into a foundation. And at that time, there was a famous report called A Nation at Risk, which said that our country was in danger of failure because of the poor education children are getting. And also mentioned that if a child cannot read and write fluently by the end of the 2nd grade, you have lost that child for life. This hit me hard, and so I made my goal in life since then to make sure that every child can read and write. We started out, we went around looking for computer programs because I had made money on computers and I thought I owed it back, but we looked at computer programs that would help, and we found one called Writing to Read. It was owned by IBM, but it was invented by a fellow named John Henry Martin. And what this software did was it taught kids the 42 sounds in the English language. You call them phonemes. So every word English language is some combination of those 42 sounds. You teach them that through cartoons and others on the computer, and then eventually you teach them, they learn, they can write it down. So they figure if they say something, they can write it because they write it in phonemes. It looks like a foreign language, but they can read it back and they know what they meant by it. And then part of the whole writing read is to eventually learn to spell. But do not take away the child's confidence by saying, well, you can't use that word because you don't know how to spell it. As long as they know what the word means, and as long as they can write it in phonemes, you give them credit for being able to learn and eventually teach them the spelling. Well, that worked amazingly well. The first pilot we did was in Mississippi, which had the lowest literacy rate in the country. Within 10 years, Mississippi passed California in literacy. As we know today, that's no big deal. But as evidenced by everybody here. No. But it showed it was very effective. We were in every school in Alabama, every school in West Virginia. We were in the Catholic schools in Boston, New York, Newark, New Jersey, and others, and of course in Southern California. So it's worked very well. Today, you have what you're called blended learning, which is taking over education to a great extent. And blended learning means to blend computer or things on the computer with things that come out of the teacher's mouth. So you have programs that can teach the kids science, math, reading, writing, in any class. We're doing it mostly in high schools now. And they learn, they have teams where the kids work on a computer together in the teams. And then a third of the time, the teachers take small segments of those students one-on-one with the teachers. And it works extremely well. And my foundation is doing this all through. We're going to visit Modern Day next week, I think, to look to see if we can implement it there. But it's something that works well, but what we found in everything, it's not easy. You need real leadership at the school and the principal, and you need a desire of the teachers to make it happen. And this is not easy to find. I mean, we've had too many schools where we've offered to give them quite a bit of money for the computers and the software, and they just can't get it together to do it. We've even hired coaches. Because one thing in Writing to Read we had was we had coaches. Like in Mississippi, for every 10 schools, we had one coach that would regularly visit the schools to making sure they're using the software or teaching them how to do it. And it's the same way with blended learning. But this is so new that it's hard to find people to coach. I mean, so it's something that has to be done, but it's not simple. Why does it have to be done? First of all, it's much more effective in teaching kids things. You can also cut the cost of education down by about 30% because you don't need as many teachers. And you don't need as many books because you can obviously use the Kindle or iPad or other to put the books on. And as you know, particularly in public schools and everything, kids lose the books. But here, you can't lose the books. It's on the internet. So we have anybody here that wants to do it at a school, just they can give me their name this morning, and I'll make sure that we visit one of the schools that's doing it well, and they can see what's expected of them on doing it. We've done the same with the Archdiocese, which is just getting on. But unfortunately, the Archdiocese got hooked into the idea that if you've given every kid in the school an iPad, you've somehow or other solved the modern problem. And it just doesn't work that simply. You need the software. You need the teacher, the coaches to make it happen. Now, back in 1988, I founded a group with Helen Bernstein, who was a head of the union, a rabble-rousing communist head of the unions, who got religion to reform the schools, and she and I founded the Alliance for College-Ready Children. And then we did school-based management, getting the teachers and principal parents of the school to manage things in the school. It turned out not to be as successful as we thought. We had like an 8 or 9% improvement, nothing better than that. Now we find at charter schools, if you do it, you can have a 50% improvement, much better. So what happened when I was mayor, the people, particularly Frank Baxter, who became chairman of the Alliance while I was mayor, turned us into helping charter schools. And the Alliance today has 21 charter schools that do extremely well. One of them, Olga Mohan High School, was ranked second in the whole country in charter schools. But we do it, we get these incredibly brilliant young principals, teachers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Teach for America, where there's a volunteer from kids from Notre Dame, Santa Clara, UCLA, USC, Princeton, Harvard, who will give 3 years of their life for teaching the poor, to teach the poor. And it's working very well. Of course, the public schools don't like us. They think we're making them look bad, and they do everything in their world to try to screw us around. But fortunately, we have strong people, we stand up to them, and we make things happen. Which gets me to the relationship of charter schools with the Catholic school. In LA, I'm not sure exactly how it works here, and in too many of the archdioceses, the Catholic leaders do not like the charter schools because the charter schools are competing with the Catholic schools. And the bottom line is they are competing with them. And they have a huge advantage because it's public. They get the full tuition covered by the state, where the Catholic school has to raise it or get poor, particularly say Latinos, to put up $6,000 or $7,000 of their own money, and then you give part of it in scholarships through the fund that you were talking about this morning. And it makes it very, very difficult for them. So what we've done, and New York is trying it right now, is, and I'll give you a name, Scott Hamilton, not the ice skater, but if somebody from Catholic schools can remember that, we'll give you his telephone number, who is working with New York on a Catholic church on a charter school. And when the idea is you have the charter school, that you lease the school property, which is part of the church usually, to the charter school, but you provide that the lease can be terminated if they do not have an ethical program like character counts or something like that, where the kids learn ethics really down to the core. And also that you lease back to the church the school property after school to teach, like from say 3 o'clock on, teach catechism, then and on weekends, so that the kids are not forgotten. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church, unbeknownst to the Archdiocese, leased several of the parishes to charter schools without telling the Cardinal or anybody else, and not having any experience as to what they should ask for. Because the pastor just figured, our school's already closed, and we need the money. But they could have, with professional help come up with a program such as I mentioned that makes it compatible. Now, I realize, having gone through Catholic schools, that going through the Catholic school is much better, infinitely better than the regular public schools and a lot better than the charter schools. Because in the Catholic schools, you automatically have a community. And that's probably the secret, because it's what the expectation of the child is by the community. They expect this child to obey laws, and the child knows that, feels it. They expect him to get good grades and go into college, and the child doesn't. So that's why such a high percentage of Catholic graduates from schools go on to college. And if you take the poor in LA, in the poor Catholic schools, like 95% of the kids are accepted at four-year colleges, while the same minority kids in the public sector are about 8 or 9% that can go there. And the charter schools do about as well as the Catholic schools, about 95%. But certainly, a child is going to be a better leader, a better adult, having gone to Catholic schools. My chief of police and my fire chief were both the products of Catholic schools in Los Angeles. And I could recommend that to anybody else. I'm just going to go out in the middle rather than to connect this with anything. I'm going to talk about gangs. How do you get rid of gangs? And mostly, one is send the kid to a Catholic school, and maybe Sister Carmelita with her ruler will be there to take care of them. But have them go to Catholic schools. But another thing that come up with and studies have, get rid of middle schools. Have the kids go from kindergarten through 8th grade in one school. The middle schools are all about gangs. The kid goes from the 5th grade, where he's bonded with his fellow students, he's bonded with the teachers, and he's thrown in to a huge middle school where the gangs grab him, try to make him a member of the gangs, where he is totally lost. A simple thing as that. The LA public schools voted to do that in 2006, and they have never used a muscle to even make it happen. They just had a vote and they've done nothing about it. So that's going to be one of my major pushes in the future, is to try to get rid of these middle schools.
Mayor, we could listen to you forever, but we do have a tight program,
so
I apologize.
I'm sorry. Okay. You told me to shut up. Let me end it. I didn't realize I was talking that long. I'm sorry. And let me just finish up by saying, remember, every child has a God-given right to the tools to compete. And you, as leaders, should care for every child. And I'll leave you with a simple quote from a Jewish rabbi, Hillel, who said, if not when, who? If not, no, I take that wrong. If not me, who? If not now, when? So to each of you, the time is here. You know what to do. Go out and do it. Thank you very much.